Howdy again, everybody. This is Doc with Thoroughfan coming to you with another fun educational segment, and we have been talking about, unfortunately, breakdowns in thoroughbreds in the last couple of segments, and in the last segment we did kind of talk about what exactly happens if or when a horse breaks down on the racetrack and what kind of treatment options there are available for a major breakdown of the fetlock joint. And for those of you that were paying close attention with the horse Princess Dorian that broke down, unfortunately, at Del Mar this past weekend, she did actually have an arthrodesis procedure performed. So you can see right there, there's something where hopefully this will have a happy ending. Again, not completely out of the woods on that, but certainly good to see all the progress notes that are coming out that are all positive at this point for her recovery. So the final thing that we are going to look at discussing is exactly what goes on when, unfortunately, a horse does not survive a breakdown, and the process of investigating what exactly went wrong, what happened to the horse, and all of those types of things as we continue my discussion series on breakdowns. All right, so in the instance, unfortunately, where a horse does not survive a traumatic breakdown or a catastrophic breakdown, the next step in most jurisdictions, not all, but most jurisdictions, is that that horse is going to be sent for what's called a necropsy. A lot of people have questions about this, exactly how to interpret what a necropsy says, what is done during a necropsy, and I wanted to be able to provide some of that basic information so that everybody is kind of like at least on the same educational platform as far as what we look at when we do a necropsy and what the parts of it are. And the first part I am going to say, of course, is it is called a necropsy. It's not called an autopsy. An autopsy implies that it's an investigation on a dead human, not any other animal. So the proper veterinary term and professional term is a necropsy, not an autopsy. So there's two main parts to a necropsy that everybody has to be aware of. The first of which is called kind of the gross exam, and this will happen as soon after the animal has died as possible, and that assures that the veterinary pathologists that are looking over the specimen have the freshest specimen to work on. There's not a lot of what we call autolytic change or death change that goes on in some of the tissues. It gives them the clearest example of what's going on. Normally, in most cases, there's going to be a history form submitted to the pathologist who's going to carry out the necropsy, indicating what happened to the horse, any medication that may have been given to the horse, preliminary findings, any x-ray findings, things like that. After that, the veterinary pathologist will then go through basically a systematic dissection of the horse. And we are going to show some pictures of that right now. I do apologize ahead of time. They may be a little graphic for some, but again, I'm about providing just the basic education so everybody understands what truly is done in these cases. And they are going to go through every system of the horse. They're going to look specifically at potential problem areas, but they are going to look at basically every organ system, all of the limbs, looking obviously at the injured limb, but they are also going to pay a lot of attention to the contralateral, or the limb on the other side, because there has been a lot of research that suggests there's potential damage to actually that limb that causes them to overload on the limb that actually breaks down. So they are going to pay a lot of attention, obviously, to the fetlock joints and the lower limbs of these horses, and all of this is done just visually with their eyes. These are very well-trained experts that are going to look at the systems, note anything that appears abnormal. They may sometimes take a couple of more x-rays of the affected area just to get more views, and they are going to write down all of their findings on what they call a gross necropsy report. So they are going to categorize the type of fracture. They're going to look for any ligament rupture or tendon rupture. They're going to see if there's any bruising anywhere. They're going to see if there was any bleeding in the lungs. They're going to look at the heart. They're going to look at all of the organs and see exactly what's going on. With all of that being said, I do want to bring this up because this comes up a lot of times in necropsy reports, and I think people misinterpret it. And a lot of times the pathologist will note that the spleen appears enlarged in these horses. And everybody, especially some of the activists, tend to jump on this and say, oh, see, the horse was drugged, and the spleen shouldn't be that large, there was a problem. What people have to realize is that in a certain class of drugs called barbiturates, they can cause the spleen to enlarge as kind of a side effect. And in most of these cases that are, humanely euthanized, we are using a very powerful barbiturate to do that. So sometimes that, again, the enlarged spleen is really misinterpreted and misrepresented. So please don't be thrown by that a little bit. If you ever see that in a gross necropsy report, it can be a fairly common finding that we find in these horses that were euthanized by lethal injection. So So they are going to, as I said, note everything, and then what they're going to do is they're actually going to take tissue samples from especially the affected limb. They are going to take a look at the bones and section them. They may section parts of the liver, parts of the spleen. They are going to take potential body fluids to do any further toxicology tests. And then what they are going to do is prepare everything for what we kind of call the microscopic part of the necropsy, or the microscopic examination of the tissues under a microscope. This is the part that takes time, and this is why a lot of times necropsy reports are not necessarily available, the next day. There may be a partial one with sort of what they found, but most pathologists are not going to put out a final report until they have both the gross and the microscopic aspects of things controlled and written out. And one of the things that takes a little bit of time is preparation of these samples. And, everybody has to understand that it does take time to prepare these samples, to be put onto slides, to be looked at, to be interpreted. Sometimes there's special staining that's involved. And especially if they are looking at bone tissue, there's a lot of decalcification that needs to go on so that they actually can get a good look and get sections thin enough to look at under a microscope. So there's going to be the gross part of the necropsy that's done almost right away. And then there's going to be the microscopic exam that sometimes can take up to 7-10 days, 2 weeks later, depending on how much tissue preparation is needed for that. And you have to remember, these pathologists, they're working on multiple cases at once. They're not necessarily just working on that particular case all of the time. So they have to take the time to look at the slide samples, then see if they see anything different in the microscopic samples, potentially order some more staining to try to get some more answers. If there were toxicology tests that were done, maybe waiting for those to come in as well. And so the pathologist takes all of this information and puts it into one general report. And that report is usually laid out first with the information about the horse itself. So if it's a microchip number or a lip tattoo, any other identifying marks of the animal, they will probably usually list the connections of the horse as well. They will then list what they kind of call what kind of necropsy condition was the animal in. And a lot of times that may be good, bad, poor, excellent, and that just depends on how much potential autolytic or change after death has gone on in the animal before the pathologist has had a chance to do his pathologic examination. Not too much to look into that, and usually they will note if there's any major changes at the end of their report. You're then going to see everything that they noticed on the gross report and any findings they may have had. They are then going to list any microscopic findings that they have there. If they took any samples for testing for bacteria or viruses or toxins or anything, that is going to be listed on that report as well. And then usually at the end, he or she is going to summarize all of those findings to say that this truly was the cause of death. This injury was potentially caused for this reason. Sometimes they can't determine it. Sometimes they'll say what we have in front of us is a fracture, that we all know basically that the cause of death was the euthanasia solution being administered. The reason for that having to be done, they will then break down what the injury was. And, with some of these, they're going to not necessarily be repetitive, but they're going to be very similar in these fetlock breakdown injuries. So that's everything that we as veterinarians and then those that are doing investigations will look at in these types of necropsy reports. And I wanted everybody to kind of understand very quickly just what goes into a necropsy report and what we are looking for and what is noted. And remember that sometimes they can't pinpoint things, and they may say consistent with, or this is consistent with this type of injury or this type of trauma type of thing. So I hope that has helped kind of explain a little bit as to what goes on in these necropsies and why sometimes, unfortunately, everybody, myself included, would love to get information a lot more quickly, but there are time issues here that, if you want to do something right and you want to be able to read these slides right and do the whole process right, it does take a little bit of time, which is why in a lot of cases we have to wait for the necropsy reports to come back to find out exactly what was going on, and if there were any further problems that were noted that might lead us on an educational basis to change some things up and go back to the trainer and say, hey, we noticed this. We really would like you to, look at maybe the way you're training or something like that, or we noticed that, these medications were in the horse's system, this might have contributed to it, or if it truly was just, there was no other evidence of injury and this was just a tragic breakdown of the horse. So, please try to keep all of those things in mind and understand that it does take a little bit of time to get these necropsy reports together. So if anybody has any further questions on the necropsies, certainly feel free to drop them in the comments section, and I will be happy to try to answer them as best as I can. But that's kind of what goes on with a basic necropsy in a horse after a catastrophic breakdown. And as always, if you guys have any questions about topics that you would like to see covered here at Thoroughfan, again, drop us a line, media@thoroughfan.com, or go ahead and put it in the comments section. I will be happy to try to research and answer it for you, because as always, we are interested in providing the facts and the actual information that you all need to be able to make an informed decision, because that's what we're about here at Thoroughfan. We want everybody to understand what's going on. We want to give them the education, and of course, we also want to give them all the ability to have as much fun at the racetrack as possible. So I'm Doc for Thoroughfan, and as always, if there are things that need to be covered in the world of racing as it pertains to fan education, there's only one place you need to go to, and that is right here at Thoroughfan. We will see you next time.